Have you ever wondered what it feels like to hold the solution to someone's desperate problem in your hands, but be too terrified to reveal that you possess it? To watch a brilliant mind struggle with something you could fix in minutes, while fear keeps you frozen in the shadows. Sometimes the very experiences that break us also forge our greatest strengths. But we become so afraid of being hurt again that we bury our gifts beneath layers of protective silence. This is the story of Chen, a woman who emptied trash cans by night but could rebuild entire computer networks from memory, and how one moment of quiet courage in a darkened office began to heal two wounded souls and change the course of a struggling company forever. The fluorescent lights of Pinnacle Dynamics flickered to life at exactly 6:30 p.m. every weekday, casting harsh shadows across the empty corridors of Seattle's most ambitious tech startup. Chen pushed her cleaning cart through the maze of cubicles, her footsteps muffled by worn sneakers that had seen better days. At 29, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself invisible, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes focused downward, existing in the spaces between other people's lives. Her uniform was always immaculate, despite its obvious age, pressed and clean, a small point of pride in a life that had been stripped of most others. The name tag read simply Maya in block letters. No surname, no indication that the woman wearing it had once commanded six-figure salaries and led teams of brilliant engineers at some of Silicon Valley's most prestigious companies. That Maya had disappeared 3 years ago, buried beneath the weight of a scandal that had destroyed not just her career, but her faith in the industry she had once loved with religious devotion. As she worked her way through the first floor, Maya's mind wandered to the routine that had become her lifeline: wake at 5 a.m. in her studio apartment in Belltown. Coffee and yesterday's newspaper at the corner diner where the owner, Mrs. Kim, always saved her a seat by the window. 8 hours at a data entry job that paid just enough to cover rent and groceries. Then here to Pinnacle Dynamics, where she could disappear into the methodical rhythm of cleaning and organizing, surrounded by the familiar hum of computers and servers that once felt like home. The building itself was a monument to startup ambition, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, with motivational posters about innovation and disruption adorning every wall. Pinnacle Dynamics had burst onto the Seattle tech scene 18 months ago with promises of revolutionizing cloud computing infrastructure. Their young CEO, Alex Morrison, had been featured on magazine covers and tech blogs, hailed as the next visionary who would challenge the dominance of Amazon and Microsoft right here in their own backyard. But Maya had noticed things during her months of cleaning here. The increasingly late nights, the raised voices from conference rooms, the gradual thinning of staff as funding rounds failed to materialize and competitors copied their innovations faster than they could implement them. She had seen the stress etched into Alex's face during the few brief encounters they'd had, usually when he worked past midnight and she knocked softly to empty his office trash. Their interactions had been minimal but oddly memorable. Unlike most executives who looked through service workers as if they were invisible, Alex always acknowledged her presence with a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, Maya," he would say, glancing up from his computer screen. "Have a good night." It was a small kindness, but after years of being treated as furniture by people in expensive suits, it had left an impression. Maya knew more about Pinnacle's technical challenges than anyone realized, not through any intentional snooping, but because programmers and engineers had a tendency to leave code displayed on their monitors, to discuss complex problems in open spaces, to scribble algorithms on whiteboards that she would later clean. Her trained eye couldn't help but catalog the errors she observed, the inefficient database queries, the security vulnerabilities that made her wince, the architectural decisions that would inevitably cause scalability problems down the road. She had seen iterations of their core platform that reminded her of systems she had built years ago, but implemented with the kind of fundamental flaws that suggested the current team, talented as they clearly were, lacked the deep theoretical background to understand why certain approaches would fail at scale. It was like watching gifted musicians trying to perform a complex symphony while missing crucial pages of the sheet music. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here was a company struggling with precisely the kinds of distributed systems challenges that had once been her specialty, the problems she had solved elegantly for clients who had paid millions for her expertise. But that expertise belonged to a woman who no longer existed, whose reputation had been so thoroughly destroyed that even mentioning her name in tech circles would invite suspicious looks and uncomfortable silences. Maya Chen had been different then. Dr. Maya Chen, with a PhD in computer science from Stanford and a list of publications that had redefined how cloud infrastructure could scale across global networks. She had been confident, passionate, unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom or speak truth to power. She had built systems that handled billions of transactions for Fortune 500 companies, had been invited to keynote conferences across 3 continents, had mentored dozens of young engineers who now held senior positions at major tech companies. That life had ended on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 years ago, when federal agents had arrived at her office with a warrant and accusations of selling proprietary algorithms to foreign competitors. The charges had been elaborate and detailed, supported by forged documents and testimony from colleagues she had trusted. Even when the case eventually collapsed due to lack of evidence, the damage had been irreversible. Her security clearance was revoked. Her consulting contracts were terminated. Job interviews ended abruptly when potential employers conducted background checks. The tech industry, for all its talk of innovation and second chances, had a long memory for scandal and a short attention span for nuance. Maya learned that being exonerated was not the same as being vindicated, that professional death could be just as final as the biological kind. She had fallen from the heights of Silicon Valley prominence to unemployability so quickly that she sometimes wondered if her former life had been a dream, but the knowledge remained. The ability to see patterns in code, to understand system architectures at a glance, to solve complex distributed computing problems that stumped teams of smart engineers. That muscle memory lived in her fingers as they moved across keyboards, in the way her mind automatically optimized algorithms, even when she was supposed to be focused on other things. She couldn't turn it off any more than she could stop breathing. As Maya pushed her cart toward the executive floor, she reflected on the strange comfort she found in this building. Pinnacle Dynamics represented everything she had lost, but also everything she still loved about technology. The energy of smart people working on hard problems, the late-night intensity of debugging sessions, the moment when an elegant solution emerged from complexity. Even as a janitor, being close to that world felt like sitting by a fire she was no longer allowed to tend. The elevator carried her to the 3rd floor, where the senior staff offices were located. As the doors opened, she could hear voices coming from the corner office, where Alex Morrison spent most of his waking hours. The conversation was heated but controlled, the kind of professional disagreement that often preceded major strategic shifts, or, in startup parlance, pivots born of desperation. Maya began her work in the hallway, emptying small trash cans and wiping down surfaces, but the voices carried clearly in the quiet building. Through the open office door, she could see Alex gesturing at multiple monitors, displaying code, network diagrams, and performance metrics. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, the uniform of a CEO who had been fighting technical fires for too many consecutive days. "The infrastructure keeps failing under load," Alex was saying to someone on a video call. "Every time we scale up, something breaks. The database queries time out, the API calls fail, and our response times become unacceptable. We're losing customers faster than we can acquire them. Maya's hands stilled on the cleaning supplies. She knew that tone. It was the voice of someone drowning in technical complexity, smart enough to understand the problem, but lacking the specialized knowledge to solve it. She had heard it countless times in her previous life, usually right before clients paid her. Substantial fees to untangle the exact kinds of architectural nightmares Alex was describing. The conversation continued, and Maya found herself involuntarily analyzing the symptoms being described. Database timeouts usually indicated either poorly optimized queries or inadequate connection pooling. API failures under load suggested bottlenecks in the request routing layer or insufficient horizontal scaling of service instances. These weren't mysterious problems. They were textbook issues with well-understood solutions, assuming you had the theoretical background to implement them correctly. As she moved closer to empty the trash bin near Alex's office, Maya caught a glimpse of the monitors displaying system architecture diagrams. Her breath caught. The design was fundamentally flawed, built on assumptions about data flow and service dependencies that would inevitably cause cascading failures as user load increased. But the fix would be elegant once you understood the core issue. It would require restructuring the database relationships and implementing a distributed caching layer, but the performance gains would be dramatic. For a moment, Maya forgot where she was, forgot who she was supposed to be. Her mind raced through the solution, mapping out the code changes, the infrastructure modifications, the testing protocols that would be needed. It was like flexing a muscle that had been dormant for years. The pure intellectual joy of solving a complex technical puzzle. She had to physically restrain herself from walking into the office and explaining exactly how to fix everything. But that would mean revealing herself, admitting that the cleaning lady possessed expertise that the company's highly paid engineering team lacked. It would mean answering questions about her background, her qualifications, her previous work. It would mean risking exposure of the scandal that had destroyed her career, the accusations that still followed her name in Google searches. It would mean stepping back into a world that had already rejected her once, with devastating finality. So Maya emptied the trash and moved on, carrying the weight of solutions she couldn't share, watching a company struggle with problems she could solve in her sleep. As she worked through the rest of the floor, she tried to push the technical challenges out of her mind, to focus on the simple, mechanical tasks that had become her refuge from complexity. But the knowledge burned in her chest, like heartburn, insistent and uncomfortable. Chen had spent 3 years learning to be invisible, perfecting the art of existing without being seen. Tonight, for the first time since her fall from grace, she wondered if invisibility was just another word for cowardice, and whether the cost of staying hidden might finally be higher than the risk of being seen. The morning sun cast long shadows across Pioneer Square as Maya made her way to Java Junction, the small coffee shop that had become her unofficial office for the past 6 months. The owner, Roberto, had grown accustomed to her daily routine: large black coffee, blueberry muffin when she could afford it, and 3 hours at the corner table with her aging laptop. To Roberto, she was just another freelancer struggling to make ends meet in Seattle's expensive tech ecosystem. He had no idea that the woman typing quietly by the window was debugging complex algorithms while officially working data entry jobs that paid $12 an hour. Maya's laptop was a Frankenstein machine she had assembled from discarded parts found at electronics recycling centers. The case was cracked, the screen had a dead pixel cluster in the upper right corner, and the fan wheezed like an asthmatic cat. But she had optimized every component to run faster than machines costing 10 times as much. It was a metaphor for her entire existence, powerful capabilities hidden beneath an unremarkable exterior, functioning despite being broken in visible ways. She opened her secure partition, the hidden section of her hard drive, where she maintained her real work. Not the mind-numbing data entry that paid her bills, but the intellectual exercises that kept her sanity intact. Maya had spent 3 years creating theoretical solutions to problems she encountered during her cleaning shifts, building elegant architectures for companies that would never know she existed. It was like composing symphonies that would never be performed, but the act of creation itself had become essential to her survival. Today's project was different. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she had overheard at Pinnacle Dynamics, the frustration in Alex Morrison's voice as he described cascading system failures that were destroying his company's credibility. Maya had promised herself she would never again become emotionally invested in other people's technical problems, but something about the situation had lodged itself in her mind like a splinter. She pulled up the mental notes she had been compiling about Pinnacle's architecture, reconstructing the system design from fragments she had observed over months of cleaning their offices. Engineers left their work displayed on monitors, discussed implementation details in hallways, sketched database schemas on whiteboards that she would later erase. Maya had absorbed it all unconsciously, her trained mind automatically cataloging inefficiencies and potential failure points. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and heartbreaking. Pinnacle had built something genuinely innovative, a cloud infrastructure platform that could potentially revolutionize how mid-sized companies manage their data processing needs. The core concept was brilliant, the kind of paradigm shift that could disrupt established players if executed correctly. But the implementation was fatally flawed, riddled with architectural decisions that would prevent the system from scaling beyond its current modest user base. Maya traced her finger across the laptop screen, following the data flow pathways she had mentally mapped. The primary bottleneck was in the database layer, where poorly normalized tables created dependency chains that caused query performance to degrade exponentially as data volume increased. The API layer compounded the problem by making synchronous calls that created blocking operations throughout the entire request pipeline. It was like building a highway with a single-lane bridge in the middle. No matter how many lanes you added elsewhere, that one choke point would limit total throughput. But Maya could see the solution with crystalline clarity. The database needed to be restructured around event-driven architecture principles with asynchronous message queues, handling the coordination between services. The API layer required implementing proper circuit breakers and bulkhead patterns to prevent cascading failures. The caching strategy needed complete redesign to reduce database load and improve response times. These weren't revolutionary concepts, but they required deep theoretical understanding and careful implementation to work correctly at scale. As she typed, Maya felt the familiar rush of solving complex technical puzzles, the intellectual high that had originally drawn her to computer science. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, building detailed implementation plans for problems she would never be allowed to solve. It was a form of self-torture, like a concert pianist practicing scales while knowing she would never again perform in public. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at Temp Staff Solutions, the agency that placed her in data entry positions. Another assignment had been cancelled, the client deciding to automate the work instead of hiring temporary workers. Maya's income, already barely sufficient to cover rent and groceries, took another hit. She would need to pick up additional cleaning shifts to compensate, assuming Mrs. Patterson at the janitorial service could find her more work. The irony was devastating. Companies were paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to consulting firms for the exact expertise Maya possessed, while she struggled to earn enough money for basic survival. She had once commanded daily rates that exceeded what she now made in 3 months, had solved problems for clients that generated millions in additional revenue. But that expertise might as well have belonged to someone else, locked away behind the wall of professional death that scandal had built around her name. Maya closed her laptop and walked the 12 blocks to her current data entry assignment, a medical billing company that needed patient records digitized from paper forms. The work was mind-numbing. Type names, addresses, insurance information, diagnosis codes, payment amounts, repeat for 8 hours with 2 15-minute breaks and 30 minutes for lunch. Her supervisor, Janet, was a kind woman who had noticed Maya's unusual speed and accuracy, but attributed it to general intelligence rather than advanced technical training. "You're too smart for this work," Janet had mentioned several times. "Have you considered going back to school, maybe studying computer programming? Tech companies are always hiring, and someone with your attention to detail would do well." Maya had learned to deflect such conversations with vague references to financial constraints and family obligations. The truth was too complicated to explain that she had already climbed the mountain Janet was suggesting, had reached heights in the tech industry that most programmers could only dream of, and had fallen so far that the crater of her professional destruction was still visible from space. During her lunch break, Maya found herself thinking again about Alex Morrison and the genuine distress she had heard in his voice. There was something different about him compared to other executives she had encountered during her cleaning work. Most treated service workers with polite indifference, acknowledging their presence only when necessary. But Alex seemed to actually see the people around him, to recognize their humanity, even when exhausted by the pressures of keeping his company afloat. She remembered one evening 3 weeks ago when she had arrived to clean his office later than usual, finding him still at his desk at nearly midnight. Instead of the mild irritation she expected, Alex had looked genuinely concerned about her working so late. "Are you okay?" he had asked. "This seems like a long day for you." The question had caught her off guard, not just because executives rarely expressed concern for janitorial staff, but because she couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked about her well-being. Maya had mumbled something about covering an extra shift, but Alex had continued. "I appreciate the work you do here. I know we don't interact much, but I notice that everything is always perfect after you've been through. That attention to detail matters more than you probably realize." He had paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Some days it feels like everything is falling apart, but at least I know the office will be clean and organized. It's one less thing to worry about." The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it had stayed with Maya for weeks. There was something profound about being seen and appreciated for work that most people considered invisible. Alex had no idea that she noticed his technical struggles, that she understood the magnitude of the challenges facing his company, that she possessed exactly the expertise needed to solve his problems. But he had taken the time to acknowledge her contribution in the one area where she was allowed to help. After work, Maya returned to Java Junction for her evening routine. The coffee shop transformed after 5 p.m., becoming a gathering place for Seattle's alternative tech community. Freelancers, startup founders, independent developers, artists who use technology as their medium. Maya had become a fixture at her corner table, the quiet woman with the ancient laptop who minded her own business and never bothered anyone. Tonight, she opened a different partition on her hard drive, one containing archives of her previous work. Maya rarely looked at these files anymore, as they served mainly as reminders of what she had lost. But something about Alex's situation had awakened her dormant professional instincts, the drive to solve complex problems that had once defined her identity. She scrolled through old project documentation, case studies of systems she had designed and implemented for major corporations, the pattern recognition algorithms that had revolutionized fraud detection for a major bank, the distributed processing framework that had enabled a social media company to handle billions of user interactions per day, the real-time analytics platform that had helped an e-commerce giant optimize their supply chain operations. Each project represented months of intense work, thousands of lines of elegant code, solutions that had generated measurable business value for her clients. But alongside the technical achievements were reminders of the scandal that had destroyed everything. News articles with headlines like "Rising Tech Star Accused of Corporate Espionage" and "Federal Investigation Rocks Silicon Valley Consulting Firm." Screenshots of forum discussions where former colleagues debated her guilt or innocence. LinkedIn notifications showing professional connections who had quietly removed her from their networks as the controversy escalated. Maya remembered the day when everything unraveled with painful clarity. She had been working on a breakthrough algorithm for optimizing distributed database queries when federal agents arrived with a warrant. The accusations were specific and damning, that she had stolen proprietary algorithms from a previous client and sold them to competitors, that encrypted files on her computer contained trade secrets belonging to other companies, that her consulting fees had been payment for corporate espionage rather than legitimate technical work. The evidence had been convincing enough to secure search warrants and freeze her assets, sophisticated enough to suggest inside knowledge of her work and personal habits. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to frame her, creating digital forensic evidence that had initially fooled even experienced cybercrime investigators. But who would go to such elaborate lengths to destroy her career, and why? The charges had eventually been dropped when the fabricated evidence began to unravel under scrutiny, but the damage had been irreversible. Tech industry executives might understand the technical complexities of the case, but they also understood the reputational risks of hiring someone who had been publicly accused of corporate espionage. Even clients who privately believed in her innocence couldn't justify the potential public relations nightmare of working with her. Maya had spent months trying to rebuild her professional reputation, reaching out to former colleagues and clients who had once valued her expertise. The responses ranged from uncomfortable silence to polite but firm rejections. "We'd love to work with you again," one former client had explained, "but our board would never approve it. Too much potential liability." Another had been more direct. "The market has moved on, Maya. Maybe it's time for you to do the same." So she had moved on, or at least moved away. Seattle had seemed like a place where she could disappear, where the tech industry was large enough to provide anonymity, but small enough to avoid the concentrated scrutiny of Silicon Valley. She had constructed a new identity built around invisibility, taking jobs that required no background checks and made no demands on her technical expertise. But expertise wasn't something you could simply turn off. Maya's mind continued to see patterns, to identify inefficiencies, to formulate solutions for problems she encountered. Working as a janitor at Pinnacle Dynamics had been particularly challenging because she was surrounded by technical challenges that she could solve, but was powerless to address. It was like being a doctor, forced to watch people suffer from diseases she knew how to cure. As closing time approached at Java Junction, Maya made a decision that surprised her. She opened a new document and began typing, not another theoretical solution for her private archives, but something different. A detailed technical proposal for restructuring Pinnacle Dynamics infrastructure, complete with implementation timelines, resource requirements, and performance projections. She told herself it was just another intellectual exercise, but her hands were shaking as she worked. For the first time in 3 years, Chen was preparing to step out of the shadows, even if she didn't yet understand how far into the light she was willing to go. Alex Morrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching Seattle's morning commute flow through the streets 30 floors below. At 28, he possessed the kind of restless energy that had made him a local tech celebrity. But today, that energy felt more like anxiety coursing through his veins. The weight of expectations pressed down on his shoulders like a physical force, each day bringing new evidence that he might not be the visionary leader everyone had believed him to be. The reflection staring back at him from the glass looked older than his years, with premature lines around dark eyes that had once sparkled with confidence. His father's eyes, everyone always said, though David Morrison had never lived to see his son attempt to follow in his footsteps. David had been a legend in Seattle's tech scene, one of the early Microsoft executives who had left to found 3 successful startups before his death in a climbing accident when Alex was 16. The comparisons were inevitable and increasingly unfavorable. Behind him, the office that had once felt like a command center now resembled a war room under siege. Whiteboards covered every wall, filled with architectural diagrams, performance metrics, and troubleshooting notes written in multiple hands as his engineering team struggled to keep Pinnacle Dynamics operational. Empty coffee cups and takeout containers cluttered his desk, evidence of the 18-hour days that had become routine as the company's technical crisis deepened. Alex turned back to his computer screens, each displaying a different dashboard monitoring various aspects of Pinnacle's infrastructure. Response times were climbing again, approaching the threshold that would trigger their largest client's automatic failover to backup systems. Database connection pools were maxed out despite serving only a fraction of the user load they had projected for this stage of growth. Error rates spiked unpredictably, causing customer support tickets to pile up faster than his small team could address them. The irony was brutal. Pinnacle Dynamics had raised $37 million in Series A funding based on demonstrations of technology that worked flawlessly in controlled environments. Investors had been impressed by the elegant user interface, the innovative approach to cloud resource allocation, the potential for disrupting established players in the enterprise software market. But scaling from a prototype to a production system serving real customers had revealed fundamental flaws that Alex's team seemed incapable of resolving. His phone buzzed with a text from Chen, Pinnacle's lead investor and the managing partner at Cascade Ventures. Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. today. Need to discuss the latest customer churn numbers. Alex's stomach clenched. Sarah had been one of his strongest supporters, the investor who had championed Pinnacle's vision when other VCs were skeptical. But even her patience was wearing thin, as quarterly reviews revealed declining performance metrics and increasing customer complaints. The customer churn was the most devastating trend. Pinnacle's platform worked beautifully when handling light loads, delivering exactly the performance improvements they had promised. But as client companies grew and their data processing needs increased, the system began to buckle under pressure. What started as occasional slowdowns escalated to frequent outages, forcing customers to maintain expensive backup systems that negated the cost savings Pinnacle was supposed to provide. Alex pulled up the customer feedback reports, reading complaints that felt like personal attacks on his competence. Pinnacle's platform couldn't handle our Black Friday traffic despite assurances that it was built for scale. 3 unplanned outages this month have cost us significant revenue and damaged our reputation with end customers. We're evaluating alternative solutions that can provide the reliability we need. Each piece of feedback represented not just lost revenue, but validation of the growing whispers in the tech community that Alex Morrison was out of his depth. The comparison to his father was omnipresent and crushing. David Morrison had possessed an intuitive understanding of both technology and business that had allowed him to anticipate market trends and build solutions that customers didn't even know they needed. Alex had inherited his father's ambition and work ethic, but the technical intuition seemed to have skipped a generation. He understood programming and system design well enough to lead an engineering team, but lacked the deep architectural insight needed to solve the kinds of complex scalability problems that Pinnacle faced. His engineering team was talented and dedicated, but they were struggling with challenges that exceeded their collective experience. Most had come from large corporations, where infrastructure problems were solved by throwing more hardware at them, or from smaller startups that had never needed to handle the kind of scale that Pinnacle's business model required. They worked tirelessly, implementing fix after fix, but each solution seemed to create new problems elsewhere in the system. Marcus Webb, Pinnacle's chief technology officer, knocked on Alex's doorframe. At 43, Marcus brought 2 decades of experience from companies like Adobe and Salesforce, but even his expertise seemed insufficient for their current crisis. His usually confident demeanor had been replaced by the haunted look of an engineer watching his best efforts fail repeatedly. The database optimization patches didn't help, Marcus reported, settling into the chair across from Alex's desk. If anything, response times are worse this morning. We're seeing cascade failures where one slow query blocks others, creating a domino effect throughout the entire system. He rubbed his temples, a gesture that had become habitual during their daily crisis meetings. I'm starting to think we need to consider a complete architectural redesign, but that would mean essentially rebuilding everything from scratch. Alex felt a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. A complete rebuild would require months of development time they didn't have, using financial resources that were already stretched thin. More importantly, it would mean admitting to investors and customers that Pinnacle's core technology was fundamentally flawed, that the $37 million in funding had been invested in a house of cards. How long would a rebuild take? Alex asked, though he dreaded the answer. Marcus shook his head. 6 months minimum, assuming we can figure out the right architectural approach. Maybe longer if we hit unexpected complications. And that's 6 months where we can't add new features or customers, where we're essentially maintaining a system we know is broken while trying to build its replacement. He leaned forward, his expression grave. Alex, I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure our current team has the specialized expertise needed for this kind of distributed systems work. We're good engineers, but this is PhD-level computer science theory stuff. The admission hit Alex like a physical blow. Marcus was admitting that despite years of experience and proven track records, Pinnacle's technical leadership was simply out of their depth. It was the kind of honest assessment that Alex respected but couldn't afford to hear, especially with a board meeting looming in a few hours. "What are our options?" Alex asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We could try to hire senior architects with distributed systems experience," Marcus replied. "But people with that kind of expertise command 7-figure salaries and equity packages. Plus, it would take months to find the right candidates and get them up to speed on our specific challenges." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Or we could bring in external consultants, but the good ones charge $50,000 a week minimum, and there's no guarantee they can solve problems that we can't." Alex pulled up Pinnacle's cash flow projections on his laptop. Even with conservative spending, they had perhaps 4 months of runway remaining before needing to raise additional funding. But raising money would be nearly impossible with their current customer satisfaction metrics and churn rates. Investors who had once competed to fund Pinnacle's growth would now avoid the company like a contagious disease. The phone rang, displaying the number for Meridian Corporation, one of Pinnacle's largest remaining clients. Alex answered with forced optimism, knowing that good news was unlikely. "Alex, this is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian." The voice on the other end was professional but strained. "We need to discuss the service outages from last night. Our quarterly reporting process was interrupted twice, causing significant delays in our financial close procedures." Jennifer had been an early Pinnacle supporter, convinced that their platform could streamline Meridian's data processing operations, but months of reliability issues had clearly eroded her patience. "I understand your frustration, Jennifer," Alex replied, falling back on the customer service script he had memorized through repetition. "Our engineering team is implementing additional monitoring and redundancy measures to prevent similar incidents." The words felt hollow, even as he spoke them, promises he had made too many times to customers who deserved better. "Alex, I've been working with enterprise software for 15 years. Jennifer's tone was firm, but not unkind. "I understand that scaling is challenging, and I appreciate the innovation that Pinnacle represents. But we can't continue to accept this level of instability. Our board is requiring us to implement backup systems that essentially duplicate the functionality we're paying Pinnacle to provide." Alex closed his eyes, understanding the implications. If Meridian needed backup systems, they were already planning their exit strategy. "What would it take for Meridian to remain confident in our platform?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would be impossible to deliver. "Honestly, 3 months of consistent uptime without any service interruptions," Jennifer replied. "Our next board meeting is in January, and they're going to ask pointed questions about our technology vendors. I need to be able to show them concrete evidence that Pinnacle has resolved these stability issues." After ending the call, Alex stared at his reflection in the blank computer screen. 3 months of perfect uptime with a system that currently failed under moderate load. It might as well have been a request to defy the laws of physics, but losing Meridian would trigger a cascade of other customer departures, as word spread through the tight-knit enterprise software community that even Pinnacle's most patient clients were jumping ship. The board meeting that afternoon was as difficult as Alex had anticipated. Chen maintained her professional demeanor, but the questions were pointed and the expectations clear. Customer retention rates were unacceptable. Technical debt was mounting faster than the team could address it. Competitive pressure was increasing as larger companies developed similar solutions with better reliability. "We need to see significant improvement in the next quarter," Sarah concluded. "Not just promises or projections, but measurable results that demonstrate Pinnacle can deliver on its original vision." She leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "Alex, we all believe in what you're trying to build here. But belief isn't enough when customers are leaving and runway is shrinking." After the board members left, Alex remained in the conference room, surrounded by financial projections and performance charts that painted an increasingly grim picture. He thought about his father's advice, delivered years ago when Alex was struggling with calculus homework. Sometimes the hardest problems require stepping back and looking at them from a completely different angle. The solution might be simpler than you think, but you can't see it when you're too close to the details. But what different angle could possibly reveal a solution to problems that had stumped his entire engineering team? Alex had hired smart people, invested in proper development tools, followed industry best practices for agile software development. Yet Pinnacle continued to struggle with fundamental scalability issues that seemed to have no clear resolution. As evening approached and the office emptied, Alex found himself working alone once again, staring at system architecture diagrams that might as well have been hieroglyphics for all the insight they provided. The cleaning crew would arrive soon, led by the quiet woman named Maya, who somehow managed to restore order to the chaos of his workspace every night. There was something almost meditative about watching her work, the methodical way she approached each task, the attention to detail that left everything spotless and organized. Alex wondered what it would be like to have problems that could be solved with such clarity, where success was measured by visible results rather than abstract performance metrics. Maya's work had immediate, tangible impact. Messy became clean, disorganized became structured, chaotic became peaceful. If only fixing distributed systems architecture could be so straightforward. The notification chime from Alex's computer cut through the silence of the empty Pinnacle Dynamics office at 11:47 p.m. He had been staring at the same performance dashboard for the past hour, watching response times fluctuate unpredictably while database connection errors spiked in seemingly random patterns. The sound made him jump, exhausted nerves already frayed from another 18-hour day of crisis management. Maya heard the chime too as she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway toward the executive offices. She had arrived later than usual. Tonight, having worked an extended shift at her data entry job to compensate for the assignment that had been cancelled earlier in the week. The building was quieter than normal, with only a few scattered lights indicating which employees were pulling all-nighters to fight their respective fires. Alex clicked on the email notification, expecting another customer complaint or urgent message from his engineering team. Instead, he found something that made no sense, a message from an address he didn't recognize, with a subject line that simply read, "Database Architecture Observations." The sender was listed as Technical Consultant 1024A ProtonMail.com, an obviously anonymous account that triggered immediate suspicion. In an industry plagued by corporate espionage and competitive intelligence gathering, unsolicited technical advice from unknown sources was usually either spam or something worse, but curiosity overcame caution as Alex opened the message and began reading. The email was unlike anything he had received before, not a sales pitch or generic consulting proposal, but a detailed technical analysis of problems that seemed intimately familiar with Pinnacle's specific challenges. Your system architecture exhibits classic symptoms of database connection pool exhaustion, combined with synchronous processing bottlenecks that create cascade failure patterns under moderate load conditions. The primary issue appears to be in the ORM layer, where N+1 query problems are compounded by inadequate caching strategies and poorly optimized database indices. Alex felt his pulse quicken. Whoever had written this email understood Pinnacle's technical stack with disturbing precision. The terminology was exactly right. The problem description matched symptoms his team had been struggling with for months, and the level of detail suggested someone with access to their codebase or extraordinary insight into distributed systems. Architecture. The email continued with surgical precision. Your API response degradation patterns suggest you're using blocking I/O operations, where asynchronous processing would prevent thread starvation. The database timeout errors indicate that your connection pooling configuration hasn't been tuned for your actual query complexity and frequency patterns. Additionally, your caching layer appears to be implemented as an afterthought rather than being designed into the core architecture. Maya finished emptying the trash bins in the hallway and approached Alex's office. Through the glass walls, she could see him hunched over his computer, his usually composed demeanor replaced by intense concentration. She knocked softly on the doorframe, following the protocol she had established during months of cleaning. Around his irregular schedule. "Come in," Alex called without looking up from his screen. "Sorry, Maya, I'll be here pretty late tonight. Don't mind me." Maya entered quietly and began her routine, emptying his trash bin and wiping down surfaces, while Alex continued reading. She could see partial reflections of his computer screen in the window glass, enough to recognize the technical documentation and error logs that had become constant fixtures in his workspace. Her trained eye automatically catalogued the architectural diagrams visible on his secondary monitor, noting the same fundamental design flaws she had been mentally documenting for weeks. "This is unbelievable," Alex muttered to himself, scrolling through what appeared to be several pages of detailed technical analysis. "How could someone know this much about our system without working here?" Maya's hands stilled momentarily as she recognized the implications of his comment. Someone had sent Alex technical advice about Pinnacle's infrastructure problems. Her mind raced through possibilities. A former employee, a consultant who had been briefed by the engineering team, a competitor conducting reconnaissance. But the timing felt too coincidental, arriving just as she was in his office, just as she had been struggling with her own decision about whether to reach out anonymously. The email Alex was reading contained recommendations that mirrored solutions Maya had been developing in her private technical exercises. The database optimization strategies, the caching architecture suggestions, the asynchronous processing patterns. They were approaches she had refined over months of mental problem-solving, theoretical frameworks she had never expected anyone else to discover independently. "Maya," Alex said suddenly, looking up from his computer with an expression caught between excitement and confusion. "You've been cleaning here for what, 6 months? Have you ever noticed anyone staying late who doesn't usually work here? Anyone who might have access to our technical systems?" The question hit Maya like an electric shock. Alex was asking her to help identify the anonymous consultant, unaware that he was speaking to the person responsible for the analysis he was reading. She felt her carefully constructed invisibility beginning to fracture, the professional distance she had maintained suddenly feeling fragile and inadequate. "I don't think so," she managed, keeping her voice steady while her heart hammered against her ribs. "Most people are gone by the time I arrive. Just you, and sometimes a few engineers, working late." Alex nodded, returning his attention to the email. "This person, whoever they are, understands our problems better than our own engineering team. Look at this analysis of our query optimization issues. It's like they've been monitoring our database performance for months." Maya continued cleaning, while Alex read aloud from sections of the email, his voice growing more animated as he absorbed the technical recommendations. The irony was devastating. She was listening to him discover solutions she had developed, watching him experience the hope and relief she had intended to provide, while maintaining the pretense that she was just a janitor with no understanding of the concepts being discussed. "They've identified the exact bottlenecks that have been killing our performance," Alex continued, speaking more to himself than to Maya. "Connection pool sizing, query batching strategies, cache invalidation patterns. This is graduate-level distributed systems theory applied to our specific architecture." The email included code snippets demonstrating implementation approaches for the recommended optimizations. Maya recognized her own coding style in the examples, the particular way she structured conditional logic and handled error cases. If Alex shared these samples with his engineering team, would they recognize patterns from her previous work? The tech industry was surprisingly small, and her coding fingerprints might be more distinctive than she had realized. But why would someone send this anonymously? Alex mused, leaning back in his chair. If they have this level of expertise, they could command consulting fees that would make them wealthy. Why give away valuable intellectual property to a company they've never worked for? Maya had finished her cleaning tasks, but found herself reluctant to leave. Alex's genuine puzzlement about the anonymous consultant's motivations touched something deep in her chest, a recognition of the fundamental loneliness that drove people to help others even when they couldn't reveal themselves. She understood the psychology because she was living it. The need to contribute, to solve problems, to make a difference, even when the personal cost was invisibility and the inability to claim credit for your work. "Maybe they just want to help," Maya said quietly, the words emerging before she could stop them. Alex looked up, seeming to really see her for the first time that evening. "That's an interesting perspective. You think someone would share this level of expertise purely out of altruism?" Maya felt herself walking a dangerous line between maintaining her cover and expressing thoughts that had been building inside her. For months. Sometimes people have knowledge they can't use themselves, but they see others struggling with problems they know how to solve. It might feel wrong to just watch without helping. But the risk, Alex countered. Sending unsolicited technical advice to a company you don't work for could be interpreted as corporate espionage or competitive intelligence gathering. This person is taking a significant legal and professional risk by reaching out anonymously. Observation hit Maya with unexpected force. She hadn't fully considered the legal implications of sending technical advice to Pinnacle, the potential for her anonymous consultation to be misinterpreted as something malicious. Her focus had been on the intellectual challenge and the desire to help, but Alex was right about the risks involved. "Maybe the risk is worth it if the help is genuine," Maya replied, then immediately regretted speaking so personally about the anonymous consultant's possible motivations. Alex studied her with newfound curiosity. "You know, Maya, you seem to have pretty sophisticated insights into technical consulting dynamics. That's not something I'd expect from—" He paused, clearly struggling with how to complete the sentence without sounding condescending. "From a janitor?" Maya finished for him, keeping her tone light despite the spike of anxiety in her chest. "I didn't mean it that way," Alex said quickly. "I just meant that your perspective on why someone would take these kinds of professional risks is surprisingly nuanced. Have you worked in tech before?" The question hung in the air between them, like a loaded weapon. Maya could feel the conversation approaching territory that would require either lying outright or revealing more about her background than was safe. She had spent 3 years perfecting the art of deflecting personal inquiries, but Alex's direct question demanded a response that wouldn't raise additional suspicions. "I've always been interested in how technology companies work," she said carefully. "You pick up things when you're around smart people solving complex problems." Alex seemed to accept this explanation, though his expression suggested he was still processing their conversation. "Well, whoever sent this email has potentially saved our company. These recommendations address every major performance issue we've been struggling with. If we can implement even half of these optimizations, we might actually be able to deliver the reliability our customers need." Maya felt a warm flush of satisfaction mixed with terror. Her anonymous intervention was having exactly the impact she had hoped for, but the conversation with Alex had brought her dangerously close to exposure. She needed to extract herself from the situation before his natural curiosity led to questions she couldn't answer safely. "I should let you get back to work," Maya said, gathering her cleaning supplies. "It sounds like you have important technical decisions to make." "Maya," Alex called as she reached the doorway, "thank you for the conversation. Sometimes it helps to talk through problems with someone who has a different perspective, even if they're not directly involved in solving them." The comment followed Maya down the hallway as she finished her rounds, echoing in her mind with uncomfortable resonance. Alex had no idea how directly involved she was in solving his problems, how many hours she had spent developing the solutions. He was now reading with such enthusiasm, but his gratitude for even their brief conversation highlighted the isolation that both of them were experiencing, him struggling with technical challenges that exceeded his team's capabilities, her possessing expertise she couldn't share openly. As Maya prepared to leave the building, she realized that sending the anonymous email had been only the beginning of a much more complex situation. Alex would inevitably want to learn more about his mysterious consultant, possibly even arrange a meeting or phone call. The engineering team would want to discuss implementation details and ask follow-up questions that would require increasingly sophisticated responses. She had intended to provide a one-time intervention, a single piece of anonymous advice that might help Pinnacle overcome its immediate crisis. But technical consulting wasn't like leaving money on someone's doorstep. It required ongoing communication, iterative refinement, and collaborative problem-solving that would be difficult to maintain through anonymous channels. Maya walked through Seattle's empty streets toward her apartment, her mind already working through the implications of what she had set in motion. The anonymous email had been a moment of weakness, a crack in the protective shell she had built around her former expertise. But Alex's genuine appreciation for the help, his obvious relief at finding someone who understood Pinnacle's technical challenges, had awakened something in her that she had thought was permanently buried. For the first time in 3 years, Chen felt like she was doing work that mattered, solving problems that required her full intellectual capabilities, contributing to something larger than her own survival. The feeling was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure, a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she might still be capable of achieving. But it was also dangerous. Every additional interaction with Alex increased the risk of exposure, the possibility that her carefully constructed anonymity would unravel and drag her back into the spotlight that had once destroyed her career. The question was whether the intellectual and emotional satisfaction of helping Pinnacle was worth the existential risk of being discovered. As Maya climbed the stairs to her studio apartment, she found herself already composing her response to the follow-up questions Alex would inevitably send to his anonymous consultant. Despite every rational argument for maintaining her distance, she couldn't resist the pull of the technical challenge and the opportunity to exercise expertise that had been dormant for too long. The anonymous consultation had become more than a single intervention. It was becoming a relationship, fragile and secretive, but real nonetheless. And Maya was no longer sure she had the strength to walk away from it, even if staying meant risking everything she had spent 3 years trying to protect. The response from technical consultant 2024 on Proton Mail. Com arrived in Alex's inbox at 6:23 a.m., just as he was finishing his second cup of coffee and preparing for what he hoped would be a more productive day than the previous several weeks. The anonymous consultant had replied within hours of Alex's follow-up questions, demonstrating either remarkable dedication or suspicious availability that made him wonder if this person was somehow monitoring Pinnacle's communications in real time. Alex opened the email with a mixture of anticipation and wariness. The previous message had been so precisely targeted to their specific technical challenges that it had felt almost supernatural, as if someone with intimate knowledge of their codebase was watching their struggles from the shadows. But the recommendations had been sound, and his engineering team had already begun implementing some of the simpler optimizations with encouraging results. The new email was even more comprehensive than the first, containing detailed implementation, guides for database query optimization, code samples for asynchronous processing patterns, and architectural diagrams that looked professionally crafted. What struck Alex most forcefully was the writing style. Clear, pedagogical, obviously from someone accustomed to explaining complex technical concepts to other engineers. This wasn't random advice from an amateur enthusiast, but consultation quality work from someone with serious distributed systems expertise. Your connection pool exhaustion issues can be resolved by implementing a 2-tier pooling strategy, the email began. Configure your primary pool for standard operations with aggressive timeout settings, and maintain a secondary pool for long-running queries that won't block normal request processing. Additionally, implement circuit breaker patterns around your external service calls to prevent cascade failures when third-party APIs become unresponsive. Alex forwarded the email to Marcus Webb with a note requesting immediate review by the engineering team. Within an hour, his phone was ringing with Marcus's number displayed on the screen. "Alex, where did this come from?" Marcus's voice carried a mixture of excitement and concern. "This is exactly the kind of architectural guidance we've been needing, but the level of detail suggests someone with access to our actual performance metrics. How could an external consultant know our specific connection pool sizes and timeout configurations?" The question had been nagging at Alex since receiving the first anonymous email. Their mysterious advisor demonstrated knowledge that seemed to extend beyond general best practices into intimate familiarity with Pinnacle's specific implementation details. Either this person had extraordinary analytical abilities that allowed them to infer system characteristics from limited information, or they had access to internal documentation that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. "I've been thinking about that," Alex replied. "Could someone be analyzing our public-facing API responses to reverse engineer our internal architecture? Or maybe they're monitoring our job postings and inferring technical challenges from the skills we're trying to hire?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering possibilities. "Those are both plausible, but this level of specificity feels like more than inference. They know our database schema design patterns, our service dependency chains, even our deployment pipeline characteristics. This reads like someone who has worked with systems very similar to ours, or," he paused, "or someone who has actually seen our code." The implication hung between them unspoken. If their anonymous consultant had access to Pinnacle's actual codebase, the situation became exponentially more complicated. It could indicate a security breach, corporate espionage, or a current employee providing advice through unofficial channels to avoid corporate policy restrictions. "Run a security audit," Alex decided. "Check access logs, review recent code repository activity, make sure our development environments haven't been compromised, but also start implementing the recommendations that make sense. If this person is trying to help us, I don't want to miss the opportunity because we're paranoid about their motivations." 3 floors below, Maya was struggling with her own version of the same dilemma. Her anonymous consultation had generated exactly the positive response she had hoped for, but Alex's follow-up questions were becoming increasingly difficult to answer without revealing information that could compromise her identity. He wanted specifics about implementation timelines, resource requirements, and integration strategies that would require ongoing collaboration rather than one-time advice. Maya sat at her corner table in Java Junction, staring at Alex's latest email while nursing a coffee that had long since grown cold. He was asking for a phone consultation to discuss the recommended architectural changes, offering to pay standard consulting rates for a brief conversation with his mysterious technical advisor. The request was both flattering and terrifying, evidence that her expertise was genuinely valuable, but also a step toward exposure that could destroy the precarious stability she had built over 3 years. Would it be possible to arrange a brief phone call to discuss implementation priorities? Alex had written. "My team is eager to move forward with your recommendations, but we want to ensure we're sequencing the changes optimally to minimize disruption to our current customer." Bazi. Standard consulting rates apply, of course. The offer of payment struck Maya with unexpected emotional force. 3 years ago, she had commanded hourly rates that exceeded what she now earned in a month of combined data entry and janitorial work. The idea that someone still valued her expertise enough to pay for it awakened feelings she had thought were permanently buried beneath layers of professional rejection and financial desperation. But accepting payment would require providing invoicing, information, establishing a legal business relationship that would leave digital paper trails. Even using a consulting shell company or freelance platform would create records that could eventually be traced back to her real identity. Maya had spent too much time learning to be invisible to compromise that safety for any amount of money. She began typing a response that attempted to maintain the helpful tone while deflecting the request for direct communication. I appreciate the offer of compensation, but I prefer to work through written documentation for complex technical discussions. Phone conversations can lead to misunderstandings when dealing with architectural specifics that benefit from visual diagrams and code examples. As Maya wrote, she found herself drawn deeper into the technical challenge than she had anticipated. Alex's questions were sophisticated, demonstrating a genuine understanding of the complexities involved in large-scale system refactoring. His follow-up inquiries showed that he was actually reading and thinking about her recommendations, rather than simply implementing them blindly. It was the kind of intellectual collaboration she had missed desperately during her years of professional exile. Regarding implementation sequencing, Maya continued in her email, I recommend starting with database connection pooling optimizations since they'll provide immediate performance improvements with minimal risk. The query optimization work should be tackled in parallel by a separate team member to avoid blocking the pooling changes. Save the asynchronous processing conversion for last, since it requires the most significant code changes and carries the highest risk of introducing new bugs. The response grew longer as Maya found herself anticipating questions and providing implementation details that went far beyond Alex's original inquiry. She included code snippets demonstrating proper error handling for the new connection pooling, logic, architectural diagrams showing how the asynchronous processing should integrate with existing service layers, and testing strategies to validate that the changes were actually improving performance rather than simply shifting bottlenecks to different parts of the system. By the time Maya finished writing, she had produced what amounted to a comprehensive consulting report that would have cost thousands of dollars from any legitimate technical consultancy. The realization was both satisfying and disturbing, evidence that she still possessed the expertise to solve complex problems, but also proof that she was giving away intellectual property that represented her only real asset in the world. At Pinnacle Dynamics, Alex's engineering team had gathered in the main conference room to review the latest recommendations from their mysterious consultant. The whiteboard was covered with architectural diagrams and implementation notes as Marcus Webb walked through the proposed changes step by step. This is graduate-level distributed systems architecture, observed Jennifer Liu, one of Pinnacle's senior developers. Whoever is writing these recommendations has serious academic credentials or extensive experience with large-scale cloud infrastructure. The theoretical framework is sophisticated, but the practical advice is exactly what we need. David Park, another senior engineer, was studying the code samples on his laptop. The coding style is interesting. Very clean, lots of defensive programming patterns, extensive error handling. This person writes code like they've been burned by production. Failures before. He looked up from his screen. Actually, some of these patterns remind me of work I've seen from the old Distributed Systems Research Group at Stanford. Very similar approach to handling async operations and resource pooling. Alex felt a chill at the mention of Stanford's research group. The distributed systems community was relatively small, and if their anonymous consultant had academic connections, it might be possible to identify them through professional networks and published research. But it would also mean they were dealing with someone whose expertise was recognized at the highest levels of computer science academia. "Should we try to identify this person?" Marcus asked. "If they have Stanford connections, we could probably track them down through conference papers or research publications." The suggestion triggered uncomfortable feelings in Alex. Their anonymous consultant was providing exactly the help Pinnacle needed, asking nothing in return except the satisfaction of solving interesting technical problems. Attempting to unmask them felt like a violation of trust, even though they had never explicitly agreed to maintain anonymity. "Let's focus on implementing the recommendations first," Alex decided. If this person wanted to be identified, they wouldn't be using an anonymous email account. Maybe we should respect their privacy while we benefit from their expertise. But privately, Alex found himself increasingly curious about the individual behind the technical advice. Their writing suggested someone with both deep theoretical knowledge and extensive practical experience, the kind of background that typically led to high-profile positions at major technology companies or prestigious academic appointments. What circumstances could drive such a person to provide free consulting to a struggling startup from the shadows? Maya's phone buzzed with a notification from her temporary employment agency. Another data entry assignment had been cancelled. This time because the client company had decided to hire permanent staff instead of using temporary workers. Her already precarious financial situation took another hit, adding pressure to find additional work just to cover basic living expenses. Tikar's irony was crushing. Maya was spending hours each day providing valuable technical consulting that could command premium rates, while struggling to find enough menial work to pay for food and rent. Her expertise in distributed systems architecture was more relevant and valuable than ever as companies worldwide grappled with the challenges of scaling cloud infrastructure. But that expertise might as well have belonged to someone else, locked away behind the professional death sentence that scandal had imposed on her career. As evening approached, Maya made her way to Pinnacle Dynamics for another night of cleaning offices and maintaining the invisible presence that allowed her to observe the implementation of her own recommendations. The building buzzed with unusual energy as engineers worked late to deploy the database optimization changes she had suggested. Through conference room windows, she could see teams huddled around laptops, monitoring performance metrics and discussing results. Alex was in his office when Maya arrived to empty his trash, but instead of the usual stress and frustration, his demeanor seemed cautiously optimistic. Multiple monitors displayed system dashboards showing improved response times and reduced error rates. The architectural changes were working exactly as Maya had predicted, validating months of theoretical analysis with measurable performance improvements. "Maya," Alex said as she knocked on his doorframe, "you should see this. Remember that anonymous consultant I mentioned? Their recommendations are actually working. Database response times are down 40%, and we haven't had a single connection timeout error since implementing the new pooling strategy." Maya felt a surge of professional satisfaction mixed with the familiar ache of being unable to claim credit for her work. "That's wonderful," she managed. "It must be a relief to see improvement after struggling for so long." "It's more than relief," Alex replied, leaning back in his chair with the first genuine smile Maya had seen from him in weeks. "It's validation that our core technology isn't fundamentally broken, that we just needed better architectural implementation. This anonymous person has potentially saved our company." The words hit Maya with unexpected emotional force. Her expertise was literally saving Pinnacle Dynamics, preventing the collapse of a company and protecting the jobs of dozens of employees. It was the kind of meaningful impact she had always hoped her technical work could achieve. But experiencing it from the shadows added a bittersweet quality to the satisfaction. "Have you been able to learn anything about who's helping you?" Maya asked, walking a dangerous line between maintaining her cover and satisfying her curiosity about Alex's perspective on the situation. Alex shook his head. "They're maintaining strict anonymity, won't even accept payment for their consulting, but the quality of work suggests someone with serious credentials, probably academic background, definitely extensive industry experience with large-scale distributed systems." Maya's pulse quickened at how accurately Alex was profiling her background, based solely on her technical writing and problem-solving approach. If he continued analyzing her work with such precision, he might eventually identify patterns that could lead back to her previous professional identity. Maybe they just want to help without complicating things with business relationships, Maya suggested, then immediately regretted offering such a personal insight into the anonymous consultant's motivations. Alex studied her with renewed interest. "You know, Maya, you have an unusually sophisticated understanding of how technical consulting relationships work. That's a pretty nuanced take on why someone might prefer to remain anonymous." The observation sent alarm bells ringing in Maya's mind. Alex was becoming more perceptive about her responses, noticing that her insights into the consulting situation were more sophisticated than would be expected from someone with her supposed background. She needed to be more careful about maintaining the boundaries between her public persona and her private expertise. "I just think some people prefer to help without expecting anything in return," Maya replied, keeping her tone casual while internally screaming at herself to stop engaging so personally with the topic. But as Maya finished her cleaning and prepared to leave, she realized that her anonymous consultation had evolved beyond simple technical advice into something approaching a genuine professional relationship. Alex valued her expertise, respected her judgment, and trusted her recommendations enough to stake his company's future on implementing them. For the first time in 3 years, Chen felt like she was practicing her profession again, even if nobody knew her real name or credentials. The satisfaction was intoxicating and dangerous, a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she might still be capable of achieving if she found the courage to step back into the light. Richard Blackwell stood in the chrome and glass conference room of Blackwell Consulting Group, studying the wall-mounted displays showing real-time performance metrics from dozens of client companies across the Pacific Northwest. At 52, he had built his reputation as Seattle's premier technology troubleshooter, the consultant that struggling startups called when their internal teams couldn't solve critical infrastructure problems. His rates were astronomical, his methods were proprietary, and his success rate was legendary among the venture capital community that kept him consistently booked. But Pinnacle Dynamics was supposed to have been different. Richard had been positioning himself to acquire their contracts when their inevitable technical collapse forced Alex Morrison to seek external help. The preliminary conversations with Cascade Ventures had suggested that Pinnacle's board was losing confidence in their young CEO's ability to resolve the scaling crisis. Richard's firm had prepared a comprehensive proposal for taking over Pinnacle's technical architecture, a project that would have generated millions in consulting fees while positioning Blackwell Consulting as the dominant player in Seattle's enterprise cloud infrastructure market. Instead, overnight performance reports showed Pinnacle's systems running more smoothly than they had in months. Database response times had improved dramatically, error rates had plummeted, and customer satisfaction metrics were trending upward for the first time since their scaling problems began. Someone was solving Pinnacle's technical challenges with surgical precision, and it wasn't Richard's team. "Sir, I've completed the analysis you requested," announced Chen, Richard's lead technical investigator, as he entered the conference room carrying a thick folder of documentation. Tom was a former cybersecurity specialist who had developed expertise in reverse engineering competitor technologies and identifying the sources of anonymous technical interventions. His services were expensive but invaluable for companies operating in Seattle's competitive tech landscape. Richard accepted the folder and began reviewing its contents. "What did you find?" "The improvements to Pinnacle's infrastructure are definitely the result of external consultation," Tom reported. "The architectural changes follow patterns that are consistent with graduate-level distributed systems theory, but implemented with practical optimizations that suggest extensive industry experience. Whoever is advising them has both academic credentials and hands-on experience with large-scale cloud platforms." Richard frowned as he studied network traffic analysis charts and code repository logs that Tom's team had compiled through various reconnaissance methods. The data painted a picture of systematic optimization work that addressed Pinnacle's fundamental scalability problems with remarkable efficiency. "Have you identified the consultant?" "That's where it gets interesting," Tom replied, pulling up additional documentation on his laptop. "The advice is being delivered through anonymous email accounts routed through multiple proxy servers. But the technical writing style and problem-solving approach are distinctive enough that we might be able to match them against published research or previous consulting work." Tom displayed a detailed analysis comparing the anonymous consultants' recommendations against architectural patterns found in academic papers and industry publications. The correlation analysis suggested potential matches with work published by researchers from Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon, as well as technical documentation from several major cloud computing companies. "The coding style analysis is particularly revealing," Tom continued. "The anonymous consultant uses specific error handling patterns and variable naming conventions that appear in papers published by the Stanford Distributed Systems Research Group between 2018 and 2021. If we can identify the primary authors of those papers, we might be able to narrow down our list of potential suspects." Richard felt a surge of satisfaction. If Tom's analysis was correct, they were dealing with someone from academic circles who could be identified through public research records. More importantly, if this person had university affiliations, there might be institutional policies that prevented them from providing unauthorized consulting to private companies. "Cross-reference the academic publications against current employment records," Richard instructed. "I want to know which of these potential matches are currently employed by companies that would prohibit outside consulting work or universities that have strict policies about conflicts of interest." As Tom began his expanded research, Richard reflected on the broader implications of Pinnacle's sudden technical recovery. His business model depended on startups experiencing infrastructure crises that exceeded their internal capabilities. Companies like Pinnacle were supposed to fail at scaling, creating opportunities for established consulting firms to step in and solve problems while charging premium rates. When companies found alternative sources of expertise, it disrupted the natural order of the consulting ecosystem. But there was something more personal about his interest in Pinnacle's situation. Richard had been watching Alex Morrison's career since he emerged as a prominent figure in Seattle's tech scene, waiting for the inevitable moment when the young CEO's inexperience would create opportunities for more seasoned professionals to demonstrate their superior capabilities. Alex represented everything Richard resented about the tech industry's obsession with youth and innovation over experience and proven track records. Richard's phone rang, displaying the number for Sarah. Janet Cascade Ventures. As Pinnacle's lead investor, Sarah would be closely monitoring the company's recent performance improvements and their implications for future funding rounds. Richard, I wanted to give you an update on the Pinnacle situation. Sarah's voice carried a mixture of relief and confusion. Their technical metrics have improved dramatically over the past week. Whatever crisis they were facing seems to be resolving itself more quickly than anyone anticipated. That's certainly unexpected, Richard replied, maintaining a neutral tone while internally calculating the implications for his proposed consulting engagement. Do we know what caused the sudden improvement? Alex mentioned that they received some external technical advice that helped them optimize their architecture, Sarah explained. He was deliberately vague about the details, but the results speak for themselves. Database performance is up, customer complaints are down, and their largest clients are expressing renewed confidence in the platform. Richard felt his opportunity slipping away. External advice from whom? If they're working with another consulting firm, Cascade should be aware of any significant expenditures or new vendor relationships. That's the strange part, Sarah continued. Alex insists they haven't hired any external consultants or incurred additional expenses. He claims they received anonymous technical guidance that helped them solve their most pressing infrastructure problems. The revelation confirmed Tom's preliminary findings while raising new questions about the anonymous consultant's motivations. If this person wasn't being compensated for their expertise, their intervention in Pinnacle's situation became much more difficult to understand or counter. Richard had built his career on the assumption that technical expertise was a valuable commodity that followed predictable market dynamics. Anonymous consulting that ignored financial incentives disrupted those assumptions in uncomfortable ways. Anonymous technical guidance is highly irregular, Richard observed. Most legitimate consultants want credit for their work and compensation for their expertise. The anonymity suggests either someone with institutional conflicts of interest or potentially industrial espionage disguised as helpful advice. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. You think someone might be manipulating Pinnacle's technical development for competitive reasons? It's certainly possible, Richard replied, recognizing an opportunity to reframe the situation in ways that might still create openings for his firm. Anonymous technical interventions often serve hidden agendas. Cascade should consider requiring Pinnacle to conduct a thorough security audit to ensure they haven't been compromised by competitors or foreign actors. The suggestion was strategically calculated. A security audit would consume time and resources while potentially discrediting the anonymous consultant's contributions. If Richard's team could identify security vulnerabilities or policy violations related to the anonymous advice, it might create opportunities to position his firm as the trustworthy alternative to mysterious external guidance. Meanwhile, at Pinnacle Dynamics, Maya was experiencing her own version of the same strategic calculations from a very different perspective. The success of her anonymous consulting had generated exactly the kind of attention she had hoped to avoid, forcing her to consider whether continuing the assistance was worth the increasing risks of exposure. The engineering team's enthusiasm for implementing her recommendations had created a feedback loop that required increasingly sophisticated guidance. Each successful optimization revealed new architectural challenges that demanded follow-up consultation. Maya found herself providing detailed code reviews, debugging assistance, and strategic planning that went far beyond her original intention of offering simple technical advice. Alex's latest email contained questions about load balancing strategies and microservices architecture that would require extensive documentation to answer properly. His messages had grown longer and more detailed, suggesting that he was developing genuine trust in his anonymous consultant's expertise. But they also demonstrated growing curiosity about her background and availability for expanded collaboration. "Your recommendations have exceeded our most optimistic projections," Alex had written. "We're seeing performance improvements that we didn't think were possible with our current infrastructure. I know you prefer anonymous communication, but our success has attracted attention from investors and potential partners who want to understand how we achieve these results. Would it be possible to provide some general information about your background or credentials that we could reference in external discussions?" The request sent Maya's anxiety spiking to new levels. Alex was asking for exactly the kind of background, information that would lead to her identification and exposure. Even general credentials or professional history would provide search terms that could eventually lead back to her previous identity and the scandal that had destroyed her career. But refusing to provide any background information would seem increasingly suspicious as the consulting relationship deepened. Anonymous technical advice was plausible for simple optimizations, but the level of architectural guidance Maya had been providing typically required formal credentials and verifiable expertise. Alex's investors and board members would eventually demand answers about their mysterious consultant's qualifications. Maya spent the afternoon drafting and redrafting her response, trying to maintain the helpful tone while deflecting requests. For personal information, the email went through dozen iterations as she struggled to balance transparency with self-protection. "I appreciate your confidence in the technical recommendations," she finally wrote. "However, I must maintain anonymity due to institutional policy restrictions that prevent me from engaging in outside consulting under my real name. Please attribute the improvements to your internal team's excellent implementation work rather than external guidance." The response felt weak, even as Maya sent it. Alex was intelligent enough to recognize that institutional policy restrictions suggested academic or corporate employment, narrowing the field of potential suspects significantly. Her attempt to deflect credit back to his internal team was probably too self-effacing to be believable, coming from someone with legitimate consulting credentials. As evening approached, Maya made her way to Pinnacle Dynamics for another shift of cleaning offices while secretly monitoring the implementation of her own technical recommendations. The irony of the situation had become almost unbearable. She was providing world-class technical consulting while emptying trash cans and mopping floors, watching her expertise save a company while earning minimum wage for janitorial services. The building's energy was different tonight, with an undercurrent of tension that Maya recognized from her previous experience in corporate environments. Engineers were working late again, but their conversations carried an edge of concern rather than the focused intensity of productive problem-solving. Through conference room windows, Maya could see presentations about security audits and vendor compliance policies, topics that hadn't been discussed during her previous shifts. Alex was on a video call when Maya arrived to clean his office, his tone more formal and defensive than she had heard before. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of a conversation about external consulting relationships and corporate governance policies. "I understand the board's concerns," Alex was saying, "but I want to emphasize that we haven't entered into any formal consulting agreements or incurred additional expenses. The technical guidance we received was provided voluntarily by someone who wanted to help our company succeed." Maya felt her stomach drop as she realized the implications. Someone was questioning Pinnacle's anonymous consulting relationship, forcing Alex to defend decisions he didn't fully understand to people who were naturally suspicious of irregular business practices. Her attempt to help was creating political problems for the person she had intended to assist. The conversation continued as Maya began her cleaning routine, trying to remain invisible while absorbing information that directly concerned her own situation. "We're implementing a comprehensive security audit to ensure that our systems haven't been compromised," Alex continued. "But I want to be clear that the technical improvements we've achieved are legitimate optimizations based on sound engineering principles." Maya recognized the defensive posture that Alex was being forced to adopt. He was having to justify technical decisions that had demonstrably improved his company's performance simply because the source of the expertise couldn't be verified through traditional channels. Her anonymity, which had seemed protective, was now becoming a liability that threatened to undermine the very success it had enabled. As Maya finished her work and prepared to leave, she realized that her anonymous consulting had entered a new and more dangerous phase. The attention generated by Pinnacle's improved performance was attracting scrutiny from people who had financial interests in the company's previous struggles. Her technical intervention had upset established expectations and created opportunities for competitors or critics to question the legitimacy of Pinnacle's recovery. The success of her recommendations was no longer sufficient protection against discovery. Someone was actively investigating the source of Pinnacle's technical improvements, using methods that could eventually lead back to her real identity. Maya would need to decide whether to abandon the consulting relationship before the investigation reached conclusions, or find ways to protect both herself and Alex from the political consequences of their irregular collaboration. For the first time since beginning her anonymous assistance, Maya understood that helping Pinnacle might require more than technical expertise. It might require stepping into the kind of corporate and political conflicts that had already destroyed her career once before. The Seattle rain drummed against the windows of Maya's studio apartment as she stared at the email that had arrived. At 3:17 a.m., forwarded from Alex's corporate account to her anonymous consulting address. The message wasn't from Alex himself, but from someone identifying themselves as a security consultant retained by Pinnacle's board of directors to investigate irregular technical advisory relationships that may pose compliance risks to the organization. Maya's hands trembled as she read the formal language demanding disclosure of her credentials, employment history, and institutional affiliations. The email cited federal regulations governing foreign technology transfer, intellectual property protection requirements, and corporate governance standards that made anonymous consulting relationships potentially illegal depending on the consultant's background and nationality. Failure to provide verification of identity and credentials within 72 hours may result in referral to federal authorities for investigation of potential industrial espionage or unauthorized technology transfer. The message concluded, "This matter involves national security considerations that require immediate resolution." The language was deliberately intimidating, designed to frighten her into revealing herself or abandoning the consulting relationship entirely. Maya recognized the tactics from her previous experience with corporate investigations, escalating legal threats, artificial deadlines, references to national security that transformed technical consulting into potential criminal activity. Someone was determined to unmask her identity, and they were using every available pressure point to force her cooperation. Maya's laptop screen displayed multiple browser tabs showing news articles about recent prosecutions of technology workers for violating export control regulations and intellectual property laws. The legal landscape had become increasingly hostile to international technology collaboration, with federal prosecutors treating even routine consulting arrangements as potential espionage if they involved foreign nationals or companies with international operations. But Maya was neither foreign nor engaged in espionage. She was an American citizen whose only crime had been trusting colleagues who had systematically framed her for corporate theft 3 years earlier. The consulting advice she had provided to Pinnacle was based entirely on her own expertise and publicly available technical knowledge, not proprietary information stolen from other companies. Still, the legal threats felt real and immediate. Maya's previous experience with federal investigations had taught her that innocence was not always sufficient protection against prosecution, especially when the charges involved complex technology crimes that juries struggled to understand. Prosecutors could construct compelling narratives around circumstantial evidence, turning legitimate technical expertise into suspicious knowledge that suggested criminal activity. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Maya. Chen, we know who you are. Stop the consulting immediately or face consequences for your previous corporate theft charges. The message included a photograph of her entering Java Junction, clearly taken within the past week by someone who had been monitoring her movements. Maya felt her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. Someone had connected her real identity to the anonymous consulting work, potentially exposing her to both legal prosecution and public humiliation. The 3 years she had spent building a new life in Seattle, the painstaking efforts to remain invisible and avoid the tech industry spotlight, had been undone by her decision to help Alex Morrison solve his technical problems. But who had identified her, and how? Maya mentally reviewed her operational security procedures, the steps she had taken to maintain anonymity while providing technical advice. She had used proxy servers and encrypted email accounts, avoided leaving digital fingerprints that could be traced back to her real identity. The breakthrough must have come from pattern analysis rather than direct technical surveillance. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. Her technical writing style, her problem-solving approaches, her specific expertise in distributed systems architecture. These were professional fingerprints that could be matched against her previous published work and corporate documentation. Someone with access to academic databases and corporate archives could have identified her by analyzing the consulting recommendations against her historical technical output. Maya opened her secure partition and began deleting files, removing traces of her anonymous consulting work and the technical analysis she had developed for Pinnacle's infrastructure problems. If federal investigators obtained search warrants for her equipment, she needed to minimize evidence that could be used to support charges of unauthorized technology transfer or corporate espionage. But even as she destroyed documentation, Maya found herself unable to abandon Alex entirely. Her latest email from him revealed the extent to which her technical recommendations had transformed Pinnacle's prospects, saving the company from what had seemed like inevitable collapse. Customer retention rates had stabilized, new client acquisitions were accelerating, and investor confidence was returning after months of declining performance metrics. "I don't know who you are or why you've chosen to help us," Alex had written, "but your guidance has literally saved our company. Whatever pressure you're facing from this security investigation, please know that Pinnacle stands behind the quality and legitimacy of your technical recommendations." The message revealed that Alex was aware of the investigation and the threats being directed at his anonymous consultant. Despite the legal risks to his own company, he was defending their consulting relationship and refusing to cooperate with efforts to unmask her identity. His loyalty was both touching and dangerous, potentially exposing him to the same legal consequences that threatened Maya. Maya drafted and deleted multiple responses, struggling to find words that would protect Alex while extracting herself from the situation safely. How could she explain that continuing the consulting relationship would endanger both of them without revealing the full extent of her legal vulnerability? How could she abandon him when his company's success depended on the technical guidance she was uniquely qualified to provide? At Pinnacle Dynamics, Alex was facing his own version of the same impossible choices. The board meeting that afternoon had been dominated by discussions of the anonymous consulting investigation, with Richard Blackwell presenting findings that painted the technical guidance as a potential security threat, requiring immediate termination. Anonymous consulting relationships are inherently suspicious, Richard had argued, displaying slides showing the legal risks associated with unverified technical advice. Companies that accept guidance from unknown sources expose themselves to intellectual property theft, competitive espionage, and federal prosecution for violating technology transfer regulations. Sarah Chen and the other board members had listened with growing concern as Richard outlined scenarios where Pinnacle's technical improvements could be evidence of foreign interference or corporate manipulation designed to steal proprietary algorithms. The presentation was professionally crafted and legally sophisticated, transforming Maya's helpful consultation into a sinister threat that demanded immediate action. We recommend terminating all communication with this anonymous consultant, Richard continued, and implementing a comprehensive security audit to determine whether Pinnacle's systems have been compromised. Any technical improvements achieved through irregular consulting should be reversed until their legitimacy can be verified through proper channels. Alex felt his anger building as Richard systematically dismantled the consulting relationship that had saved his company. The recommendations had been brilliant, the implementation had been flawless, and the results spoke for themselves. But Richard was using legal technicalities and security concerns to undermine genuine technical achievements for reasons that seemed more personal than professional. The consultant hasn't asked for payment, hasn't accessed our systems without permission, and hasn't provided anything except sound technical advice, Alex countered. Every recommendation has improved our performance and strengthened our competitive position. Why would we terminate a relationship that's generating measurable business value? Richard's response was smooth and practiced. Anonymous expertise is inherently untrustworthy, regardless of short-term results. Legitimate consultants want credit for their work and compensation for their expertise. The anonymity suggests hidden agendas that pose unacceptable risks to Pinnacle's long-term security. The board voted to require Alex to terminate the anonymous consulting relationship immediately, with failure to comply potentially triggering his removal as CEO. Richard's presentation had been persuasive enough to overcome the obvious benefits of Maya's technical guidance, replacing rational analysis with fear-driven decision-making that prioritized legal safety over business performance. As the meeting ended, Alex found himself in an impossible position. Complying with the board's directive would mean abandoning the consultant who had saved his company, while continuing the relationship would risk his own career and potentially expose Pinnacle to legal liability. The situation had evolved beyond technical consulting into a test of loyalty and courage that would define his character as a leader. That evening, Maya arrived at Pinnacle Dynamics for what she suspected might be her final shift as a janitor. The building's atmosphere had changed dramatically, with security guards checking identification more carefully and employees working under obvious tension. Her anonymous consulting had transformed from a helpful secret into a corporate crisis that threatened everyone involved. Alex was alone in his office when Maya knocked on the doorframe, his usual greeting replaced by a careful examination of her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The conversation they had been avoiding for weeks could no longer be postponed, despite the risks it posed to both of them. "Maya," Alex said quietly, "I think we need to talk." The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge neither could cross safely. Maya felt her carefully maintained invisibility finally cracking under the weight of circumstances that had spiraled beyond her control. 3 years of hiding were about to end, but she no longer knew whether stepping into the light would bring redemption or destruction. "I know you've been helping us," Alex continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how or why, but I know it's you." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she calculated her options. Denial would insult Alex's intelligence and potentially make the situation worse. Confession would confirm his suspicions, but might allow them to coordinate their responses to the mounting legal and political pressure. Silence would leave both of them vulnerable to forces neither could control alone. "The board has ordered me to terminate our consulting relationship," Alex said, his expression pained. "They're threatening to remove me as CEO if I continue working with an anonymous advisor. But I can't abandon someone who saved my company without at least understanding what's really happening." Maya realized that Alex was offering her an opportunity to explain herself, despite the personal and professional risks he would face for harboring an anonymous consultant who was under federal investigation. His willingness to trust her, even when he didn't fully understand her situation, represented the kind of loyalty she hadn't experienced since her career was destroyed 3 years earlier. "Alex," Maya said slowly, "what I'm about to tell you could destroy your company and end your career. Are you sure you want to know the truth?" The question crystallized the moment of decision that both of them had been approaching since their first anonymous email exchange. Alex would need to choose between the safety of ignorance and the responsibility of knowledge, while Maya would need to trust someone with secrets that could either save or damn them both. "Tell me," Alex replied without hesitation. "Whatever the consequences, I need to understand what we're really facing." Maya took a deep breath, preparing to break 3 years of carefully maintained silence and step back into a world that had already rejected her once. The truth would either set them both free or ensure their mutual destruction. But the choice to remain hidden had been taken away from her by forces that valued control over innovation and conformity over excellence. "My name is Dr. Maya Chen," she began, "and 3 years ago I was the most sought-after distributed systems consultant in Silicon Valley until I was framed for corporate espionage and had my career destroyed by the same kinds of people who are investigating us now." The words felt both liberating and terrifying, marking the end of her anonymous existence and the beginning of whatever would come next. Maya had finally found someone worth trusting with her story, but the telling would require courage she wasn't sure she still possessed after years of hiding in the shadows. Alex stared at Maya as the implications of her revelation crashed over him like a cold wave. Dr. Maya Chen. The name triggered immediate recognition from his graduate coursework in distributed systems, where her seminal papers on cloud architecture optimization had been required reading. But he also remembered the scandal that had destroyed her reputation, the federal investigation that had dominated tech industry headlines 3 years earlier. "You're the Maya Chen who revolutionized database sharding algorithms for Netflix," Alex said slowly, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. "Your work on elastic load balancing is cited in every major cloud computing textbook, but I thought you had disappeared after—" He paused, struggling with the delicate phrasing. "After I was accused of selling trade secrets to foreign competitors?" Maya finished for him, her voice steady despite the pain visible in her eyes. "Yes, that was me. Dr. Maya Chen, rising star of Silicon Valley, reduced to cleaning offices and hiding from an industry that branded me a traitor without bothering to verify the evidence." Alex felt his worldview reshaping itself around this. New information. The anonymous consultant who had saved his company wasn't just technically competent. She was one of the most brilliant distributed systems theorists of her generation, a researcher whose innovations had influenced the entire cloud computing industry. But she was also someone whose career had been destroyed by accusations serious enough to trigger federal investigation. Maya, if you're innocent, why are you working as a janitor instead of fighting to clear your name? Alex asked, though he suspected the answer would reveal uncomfortable truths about how the tech industry treated people caught in scandal. Maya sat down in the chair across from his desk, her professional composure cracking to reveal exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. Because innocence doesn't matter when the evidence against you is sophisticated enough to fool cybercrime investigators and the industry decides you're guilty regardless of what the courts conclude. She pulled out her phone and showed Alex a series of screenshots, news articles, forum discussions, LinkedIn posts from former colleagues distancing themselves from her work. The charges were eventually dropped when the fabricated evidence began unraveling, but by then the damage was irreversible. No tech company would hire someone who had been publicly accused of corporate espionage, even after exoneration. Alex studied the documentation Maya had preserved from her professional destruction. The allegations had been specific and damaging. Theft of proprietary algorithms, unauthorized access to competitor systems, encrypted files containing trade secrets from multiple companies. Even knowing the charges were false, he could understand why potential employers would view her as too risky to hire. "Who framed you?" Alex asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would connect to their current situation in uncomfortable ways. Maya's expression hardened. "Someone with intimate knowledge of my work and access to my personal computer systems. Someone who understood distributed systems architecture well enough to create convincing evidence of technology theft. Someone who benefited professionally from my removal from the consulting market." The implication hung between them unspoken. Maya's expertise directly competed with established consulting firms that charged premium rates for the same architectural guidance she could provide. Her destruction had eliminated a competitor while creating market opportunities for more traditional consulting companies. "Richard Blackwell," Alex said, the pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. "He's been trying to position his firm to take over our technical architecture for months. When your anonymous consulting started working, he suddenly became interested in investigating our security compliance." Maya nodded grimly. "I noticed his name in the board meeting notes you left on your desk." Blackwell Consulting Group was one of the firms that publicly questioned my work during the investigation, despite having no direct knowledge of my projects. They used the scandal to discredit my architectural approaches and promote their own methodologies as more secure. Alex felt anger building in his chest as the scope of the manipulation became clear. Richard hadn't just been competing for Pinnacle's consulting contract. He had been systematically destroying Maya's ability to provide alternative technical guidance. The security investigation wasn't about protecting Pinnacle from external threats, but about eliminating competition from someone whose expertise exceeded his own. "We have to expose him," Alex said, his voice tight with fury. "If Richard framed you 3 years ago and is now using the same tactics to undermine our consulting relationship, we need to document the pattern and present evidence to the board." Maya shook her head sadly. "Alex, you don't understand how sophisticated this kind of character assassination can be. Richard has spent years building relationships with federal investigators, corporate security consultants, and industry leaders who trust his judgment about technical threats. My word against his carries no weight, especially when I'm working as a janitor and he's running a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. The frustration in Maya's voice revealed years of helplessness against forces that had systematically stripped away her professional credibility. Alex began to understand why she had chosen invisibility over fighting back. The system was structured to protect established players like Richard while punishing innovators who challenged conventional approaches. But your technical work speaks for itself, Alex argued. The improvements to our infrastructure are measurable and documentable. If we can demonstrate that your recommendations generated genuine business value, it undermines Richard's claims that anonymous consulting is inherently suspicious. Maya smiled sadly. You're thinking like an engineer who believes technical merit determines professional success. But Richard is playing a different game, one where perception and political connections matter more than actual results. He doesn't need to prove that my technical advice was wrong. He just needs to convince people that the source of that advice is untrustworthy. Alex's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus Webb. Alex, emergency meeting in conference room A. The security audit team found something they want to discuss immediately. The timestamp showed the message had been sent 15 minutes earlier, suggesting that whatever they had discovered was significant enough to interrupt the evening work session. I have to go, Alex told Maya, though leaving felt like abandoning her when she had finally trusted him with her story. But this conversation isn't over. If Richard destroyed your career to eliminate competition, we're going to find a way to prove it and hold him accountable. Maya stood to leave, but paused at the doorway. Alex, be careful what you say in that meeting. If the security team has identified me as your anonymous consultant, anything you say in my defense could be used against you later. Richard is very good at turning loyalty into evidence of poor judgment. As Maya disappeared down the hallway with her cleaning cart, Alex felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Defending his anonymous consultant meant risking his own career and potentially exposing Pinnacle to legal liability. But abandoning Maya would mean collaborating with the same forces that had already destroyed one brilliant career through manipulation and character assassination. Conference room A was filled with serious-faced individuals when Alex arrived. Marcus Webb, 2 members of the security audit team, and Richard Blackwell himself, whose presence confirmed Maya's warnings about the political dimensions of their situation. Laptops displayed network traffic analysis charts and code repository logs that suggested comprehensive surveillance of Pinnacle's technical operations. Alex, we've identified your anonymous consultant, announced Janet Morrison, the lead security auditor, as she gestured toward a presentation screen showing email routing analysis and digital forensics results. Dr. Maya Chen, former Stanford researcher, currently employed as a night janitor for Seattle Commercial Cleaning Services. Richard leaned forward with barely concealed satisfaction. Dr. Chen was investigated by federal authorities 3 years ago for stealing proprietary algorithms from corporate clients and selling them to foreign competitors. The charges were dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the investigation revealed concerning patterns of unauthorized access to confidential technical information. Alex kept his expression neutral despite the rage building inside him. Richard was using Maya's previous legal troubles to discredit her current assistance, framing her anonymous consulting as evidence of continued criminal activity rather than legitimate technical expertise. Her recommendations have demonstrably improved our infrastructure performance, Alex replied carefully. Every optimization she suggested has generated measurable business value without compromising our security or intellectual property. Janet Morrison pulled up additional slides showing Maya's employment history and current financial situation. Dr. Chen's transition from high-level consulting to menial labor suggests possible desperation that could motivate industrial espionage or technology theft. Her access to your offices as a cleaning contractor provided opportunities to observe confidential technical information. The presentation painted Maya's anonymous assistants in the worst possible light, transforming her expertise into evidence of criminal intent and her desire to help into proof of malicious manipulation. Alex realized that Richard had spent considerable resources building a case against Maya that would be difficult to refute through technical arguments alone. "What action does the security team recommend?" Alex asked, though he dreaded the answer. Richard spoke up before the auditors could respond. Immediate termination of Dr. Chen's janitorial contract, cessation of all communication with her anonymous consulting accounts, and reversal of any technical changes implemented based on her recommendations. Additionally, we recommend reporting this incident to federal authorities for investigation of potential technology transfer violations. The recommendations would not only destroy Maya's remaining sources of income, but potentially expose her to renewed federal prosecution for activities that were entirely legitimate. Richard was using the investigation to eliminate both Maya's ability to compete with his consulting firm and her capacity to provide alternative technical guidance to companies like Pinnacle. "I need time to review these findings with our legal team," Alex said, buying time to develop a response strategy that might protect both Maya and his company. "We'll schedule a follow-up meeting tomorrow to discuss implementation of your recommendations." As the meeting broke up, Richard approached Alex with an expression of false concern. "Alex, I understand that Dr. Chen's technical advice may have seemed helpful, but you need to consider the legal and reputational risks of associating with someone who has been investigated for corporate espionage. Pinnacle's investors deserve better than having their portfolio company exposed to these kinds of compliance issues." The threat was subtle, but clear. Richard was suggesting that continued association with Maya could jeopardize Pinnacle's relationships with investors and potentially trigger board action against Alex's leadership. The consulting firm's influence extended beyond technical expertise into the financial and political networks that controlled startup funding and corporate governance. After Richard left, Alex remained in the conference room, staring at the security audit findings that transformed Maya's brilliance into evidence of criminal behavior. The documentation was professionally crafted and legally sophisticated, designed to convince readers that anonymous consulting was inherently suspicious, regardless of its technical merit or business value. But Alex had seen Maya's work firsthand, had witnessed the elegant solutions she developed for complex infrastructure problems, had observed the genuine satisfaction she took in solving technical challenges that helped other people succeed. Her expertise was real, her motivations were pure, and her contributions had literally saved his company from collapse. The choice facing Alex was stark and immediate. He could comply with the security audit recommendations, protecting himself and Pinnacle, while abandoning Maya to renewed prosecution and professional destruction. Or he could defend her expertise and loyalty, risking his own career to fight the same forces that had already demonstrated their ability to destroy brilliant people who threatened established interests. As Alex walked through Pinnacle's empty offices, he realized that Maya had been right about the nature of the game they were playing. Technical merit was insufficient protection against political manipulation and character assassination. But perhaps that meant the game itself needed to change, starting with people who were willing to risk everything to defend truth and excellence. Against comfortable corruption, Maya Chen had saved his company and trusted him with her story. Now Alex Morrison would need to decide whether he possessed the courage to save her in return, knowing that the attempt might destroy them both, but that failure to try would make him complicit in the systematic destruction of everything he claimed to value about innovation and integrity. The anonymous consulting relationship had evolved far beyond technical advice into a test of character that would define not just their individual futures, but the kind of industry and society they were willing to accept. Alex understood that his next decision would either validate Maya's faith in him or confirm her worst fears about a world that punished excellence and rewarded conformity. Tomorrow's meeting would determine whether justice was possible in an industry that had already demonstrated its willingness to sacrifice brilliance for political convenience. Alex intended to be ready for that fight, regardless of the personal cost. The next morning, Alex made a decision that would either vindicate everything he believed about justice and innovation or destroy his career in spectacular fashion. Instead of attending the scheduled follow-up meeting with Richard's security team, he called an emergency all-hands meeting for the entire company, including board members, investors, and key clients who could attend virtually. Maya arrived for her usual cleaning shift to find Pinnacle's main conference room, packed with people she recognized from months of invisible observation. Alex stood at the front of the room, his expression determined but nervous. When he spotted her in the doorway, he gestured for her to enter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alex began, "I want to introduce you to Dr. Maya Chen, the person who saved our company." The room erupted in confused murmurs as Maya reluctantly stepped forward, still wearing her cleaning uniform, but carrying herself with the dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Richard Blackwell's face went pale as he realized his carefully orchestrated investigation was about to be exposed. 3 years ago, Dr. Chen was framed for corporate espionage by competitors who feared her innovations, Alex continued, pulling up slides showing Maya's original research papers alongside the technical optimizations that had transformed Pinnacle's performance. The same person now trying to discredit her anonymous assistants was involved in destroying her career the first time. Maya stepped to the microphone, her voice steady despite years of enforced silence. "I've spent 3 years in hiding because I believed the system was too corrupt to allow truth to prevail. But Alex Morrison showed me that some people still value excellence over politics." She pulled out a laptop and connected it to the presentation system, displaying evidence she had been gathering for months. Financial records showing Richard's firm had profited enormously from consulting contracts with companies that had previously used Maya's services, email communications between Richard and the investigators who had originally targeted her, and technical analysis proving that the stolen algorithms had actually been her original innovations. "Richard Blackwell didn't just destroy my career," Maya announced. "He stole my intellectual property, repackaged it as his own consulting methodologies, and built his entire business model on work I had developed years earlier." The evidence was devastating and comprehensive. Richard had not only framed Maya for corporate espionage, but had systematically plagiarized her technical innovations, presenting them as proprietary methodologies developed by his consulting firm. The investigation that destroyed her reputation had been designed to eliminate competition while stealing her life's work. Sarah Chen, Pinnacle's lead investor, stood up slowly. "Dr. Chen, these are serious allegations. Do you have corroborating evidence that can be independently verified?" Maya nodded, displaying forensic analysis of code repositories and technical documentation that proved the timeline of her innovations predated Richard's claimed developments by years. Every algorithm, every architectural pattern, every optimization technique that Blackwell Consulting claims to have developed can be traced back to my original research. He didn't just frame me. He built his entire reputation on stolen work, Richard tried to salvage the situation with bluster and legal threats, but the evidence was overwhelming. As Maya methodically dismantled his professional credibility, other attendees began sharing their own suspicions about his practices. Former employees revealed that Richard's firm regularly hired private investigators to target competitors, and clients admitted they had always wondered how his team could solve complex problems so quickly. The presentation concluded with Alex announcing Pinnacle's decision to hire Dr. Maya Chen as Chief Technology Officer, with a compensation package that included equity and public acknowledgement of her contributions to the company's success. Maya's expertise saved our company when traditional consulting failed us. It's time the industry recognized her true value. 6 months later, Maya stood in her new office overlooking Seattle's skyline, watching Richard Blackwell's consulting firm dissolve under federal investigation for fraud and intellectual property theft. Her reputation had been fully restored, with major technology companies competing to hire her for consulting projects that commanded premium rates. But more importantly, she had helped establish new industry standards for anonymous consulting and whistleblower protection, ensuring that other brilliant minds wouldn't face the same systematic destruction she had endured. Alex's courage in defending her had sparked broader conversations about corporate ethics and the responsibility to protect innovation from political manipulation. "Dr. Chen," Alex said, knocking on her office door, "our latest client wants to schedule a consultation about distributed database optimization. Apparently, they specifically requested to work with the anonymous consultant who revolutionized Pinnacle's infrastructure." Maya smiled, remembering her nights of cleaning offices while solving billion-dollar technical problems in her spare time. "Tell them Dr. Maya Chen is available for consultation and she doesn't work anonymously anymore. The transformation from invisible janitor to celebrated technology leader had been more dramatic than any fiction, but it represented something profound about the power of expertise, loyalty, and moral courage to overcome systematic injustice. Maya had learned that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to remain hidden when the world needs your gifts. Have you ever wondered what incredible talent might be hidden in plain sight around you? Maya's journey from shadows to success reminds us that brilliance can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that one person's courage to stand up for truth can change everything. If this story of hidden potential and ultimate justice resonated with you, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things. Like this video if Maya's resilience touched your heart, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that their lowest moment could be preparing them for their greatest triumph. What talents are you hiding? What would you risk to help someone achieve their dreams? Let us know in the comments below. Your story might inspire our next video. Until next time, remember, your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it, but by the courage you show in sharing your gifts with the world. Subscribe now and join our community of people who believe that everyone deserves a chance to shine.